Hello, bonjour, buenos dias. I don't want to start with other languages, this is enough. Today we're talking about a fundamental part of the language learning process, which is learning vocabulary. Very important. Why? Saves your ass when the conversation starts to get difficult. You can still have a good idea about what these people are talking about. Also, sometimes makes you seem like you know more than you actually do. These would be my motives for learning vocabulary. Thank you very much. I'm Eylül. I speak 6 languages. I don't like how my hair looks today, but at least I have my Twilight hoodie on. So let's just get into the video. Let's start with the number one thing you absolutely should know. This is very basic, but it is learning in context. So what does this mean? I feel like for years and years, people have thought that vocabulary is just something you memorize. You start a new unit in your textbook. Sometimes you get a new list of vocabulary and your job is to write the translation next to it. Repeat, repeat, repeat. I remember when I was younger, our English teacher in 4th grade would give us homework. She would ask us to write down the new vocabulary that we were learning 5 or 10 times with the translation next to it. So like Turkish, English, Turkish, English. This is bullshit. If this is your method of learning vocabulary, then you're gonna have a terribly hard time later on remembering those words when you actually need them. I remember with the same teacher, sometimes we would have these challenges where she would ask us to use these new words that we've learned in sentences of our own, which is a great exercise actually, but no one in the class could. Literally no one could. Were all of my classmates lazy? Some of them probably. I was a super lazy kid. The main reason why no one really could remember was because for years and years, these language teachers treated vocabulary as if it's something different, something separate, a separate part of the language learning process. Some teachers would even make us buy like a vocabulary book so we could like write down the new words that we were learning. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people back home complain about how they can understand a lot of English but can't really speak it. When they're learning all these new words, there is no processing going on here. It's just repeat, repeat, repeat. Instead, what I always do, what I could recommend, is that if I'm reading an article, a paragraph, watching a TV show, listening to a story, if I come across a word that I don't know, first of all, I try to guess what that word might mean. So I think about it a little bit, right? Your first instinct might be to go to your dictionary, but no, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Calm down. Think a little. You already have the context. Just try to make sense of things a little bit. And only after that, I pull out one of my online dictionaries, look for the translation. Then I go back to the place where I first saw that word and I read or listen again. I really don't know if it's the right way to explain this, but this is like the only way how my brain puts these new words, new vocabulary into the right place, the place where it should be. If I just see a word as a separate thing and I have to write down the translation, then it's kind of like floating around in my brain. It's like not in the right place. I can't pull it out if I ever need it. Also, if you wish to get more scientific, ChatGPT kindly let me know that this is a theory called Craik and Lockhart's levels of processing theory. The depth at which we process information affects how well we remember it. The deeper the processing, an example of relating new words to existing knowledge or experiences, the better the retention. So this is why my country's education system has been failing me. But that's fine. I feel like a lot of people around the world have similar stories. Also, I was not even aware that I was doing it, but even when I was really young, learning my first foreign language, which was English, whenever I would watch something in English, I would really pay attention to the words that people were using. I would never just turn something on and read the Turkish subtitle. And so in a way, it kind of became my system, if you can call it that. I would learn, see a new word in school, in my textbook, and later on I would come across to that word in TV shows, the songs that I was listening to, and I would be like, so this is how this celebrity that I love used it, or this is how they used it in a song that I like. And after that, it would basically be impossible for me to forget that word. So kids, never learn new words on their own. Don't treat them as they're something separate. Take them with whole sentences, take them in situations, take them in, the whole thing. Not the word. We take the whole thing, we take it in context. This is especially helpful when words have more than one meaning, which happens a lot. This is not math, so you can't expect 2 + 2 to be always 4. Depending on the culture, depending on the context, a lot of things can mean different things, especially if we're talking about a language that is spoken in more than one country. I think I always give this example to my friends, but for example, in Spain, to pick something up or to get something from a shelf could be coger, which means to fuck in Latin American Spanish. So be careful, stay safe out there, and welcome to the world of learning languages. Well, in this part, I also just have to mention something that was a total game changer for me. I feel like I can't talk about learning in context without talking about Lingopie. Lingopie is a language learning platform where you can learn languages by immersing yourself in authentic movies and TV shows of that culture. First of all, it has an extensive content library, which is much better than the streaming services I've been using until now, if you ask me. I don't know what I was doing with those. so. Second of all, on top of being able to watch the content with double subtitles, you can even click on the words to directly get their translations, which then Lingopie will automatically save for you. And after that, it even creates personalized flashcards for you using those same words that you clicked on. I always mention how much I love studying with flashcards, and I will mention them again later in the video, but I'm too lazy to make them myself, so figuring out that this exists was like a wildest dream come true for me. It also has some other amazing features like quizzes or letting you see the transcript of the whole show. Makes it so much easier to go back and play it again. I would 100% definitely recommend it. Also, you can get a 7-day free trial and a discount if you click the link in my description right now. So go try it out for yourself and you will see that I was not exaggerating. Thank you Lingopie for sponsoring this video. I love you. Okay, we're moving on with the video. So another thing that is fundamental to my language learning process is to make sure whenever I'm learning a new word, I try to put it into use right away. For example, if I'm reading the news and if there's a new word that I don't know comes up, I highlight it and make sure to write another example sentence with it. But you see, the most important part of this whole process is to come up with that sentence yourself. I used to just put the word in online dictionaries, get an example sentence, write that sentence down exactly, and move on with my life. But the thing is, I really felt the difference when I came up with that sentence myself. A sentence generated by me and my brain cells only. Now, apparently this also has some science behind it. This is called the generation effect. The generation effect refers to the phenomenon where information is better remembered if you actively generate it yourself rather than simply being presented with it. So basically doing this boosts your retention. You're much more likely to remember this word in the long run. Another thing that I pay attention to when I'm doing this is that I'm trying to come up with sentences that I'm actually likely to use later on. And this is true even in the beginning stages. For example, let's say I'm trying to learn the word tall. The sentence that I would build with this word would be, I am not tall. I am unfortunately very likely to use that sentence in real life is something I would actually say. So in this situation, doing that did not only boost my retention because I generated the sentence, but because it also kind of prepared me for a future use. So later on when I'm in a conversation, I can easily pull this sentence because I generated it once, like my brain thought of it once. So technically for the generation effect to work, the sentences do not have to be about you. But in my experience, it kind of further boosts my retention if I do that, because for me, it just makes it more interesting, thinking that I could actually use these sentences myself someday. I already told you guys in my previous videos that I have a habit of thinking in my target language, and so as weird as it sounds, sometimes when I'm having these fake conversations with myself in my head, I'm also imagining scenarios where I can use these new vocabulary that I have learned, and it just helps me remember so many things. It's a lot going on here. My third recommendation, the things that I will be mentioning here are, I think, very commonly mentioned in the learning community, but here's how I use them: spaced repetition and active recalling. So they are actually two distinct learning methods, techniques, but the reason why I group them together is because there are a lot of great apps, services these days that combine both of these together, such as Anki, Quizlet, Bytes, and many more. And as I've mentioned previously, although I would not just depend on them for vocabulary, I think they're a great boost, especially when you're a beginner feeling kind of overwhelmed in the sea of new vocabulary that you have to learn. You can get a hold of a good amount of vocabulary in a short amount of time, and you technically don't even have to download an app for this. If you have a pen and paper, you can create your own flashcards and kind of like test yourself. You can give yourself a kind of fill in the blank type of situation. But I am Gen Z, I don't even own paper, and I like the flexibility of being able to use these services on my computer or on my phone when I'm on the go. And among all of them, I think I've used Quizlet for the longest. I would basically just create vocabulary decks for myself, and I would just do the learning mode for 1 or 2 hours if I could. I don't have the premium membership, I never did, but I think if you have it, you can even add like pictures to your flashcard, which is also great for retention. Like, rather than depending on the translation of the word, it's much better if your brain associates that word with the object or the action, if it's a physical object or a verb. But yeah, it's kind of hard to do so if it's more like an abstract concept. For example, I was never like masat table. It was always more like when I see a table, when I see it, I wanted to be able to think of the word table. Because if I try to learn the word with its direct translation, the next time that I want to say a table, I will have to think of masa first in Turkish, and then only from there I can go to table, which is going to complicate things even further for me, and it's going to make it extremely difficult for me to pull out this vocabulary during an actual conversation or when I have to write it down, use the word later on. So yeah, I think there are also services that lets you attach pictures with your flashcards, which can help you a lot. Also, sometimes when I'm tired, I like doing these things like the learning mode on Quizlet while listening to music. Technically speaking, this method would be much more effective without listening to any music. Studies have shown that unless you're listening to classical music, you should not be studying with music. But to that I say, I don't want to hear it. On the days where I'm tired, where I'm kind of fed up, I'm either not going to do anything or do my silly little flashcard deck while blasting my Guilty Pleasures playlist. Thank you very much. And I honestly find that it's still helpful to me. Not to mention that I learned a lot of vocabulary from songs. Because think about it. Let's say you learn a new word from a TV show or from like a book. Realistically, how likely are you to go back and watch that same scene again? Or how likely are you to read that same page in that same book again? And unless it's a very common word, you might not even see it again for a while. But you listen to the same song for more than once throughout the week, month, year. So it's also like spaced repetition. Honestly, for me, if it's in a song, I never forget it again. And it's so interesting to me because sometimes I even remember exactly which song I've learned that word from for years. I learned the word same from Same Mistakes by One Direction, and like 12 years later I still very clearly remember it. I have this strange habit of writing down like song lyrics, the whole thing. I would just write them down and make it look pretty for hours and hours. That was a hobby of mine, I guess, and that taught me so much vocabulary. Anyways, it's just me fighting science again, but if it makes you happy, if it makes you as happy as it makes me, I would definitely recommend blasting your favorite songs in your target language while you're doing these flashcard thingies. Moving on to my next recommendation, mix it up. So especially if you're learning a language with a textbook or if you're like taking structured classes, you know how in the books or in classes you almost always follow like a unit. And the new vocabulary are introduced to us within those units, like days, months, seasons, and then you have countries, languages, nationality, then you move on to fruits, vegetables, etc. One thing I've realized after learning vocabulary that way for so long is that if I see those words in a different context, used with completely different words, it gets harder for me to be able to actually remember them or to remember them as fast as I would like to. Like, it takes so much more effort because the word apple for me only existed with other fruits like oranges, bananas. So when I see it in a place that is completely different, for example, let's say if I'm reading a story and it says this and that was happening and an apple fell from the tree, it takes me a second. Or if I have to use the word apple myself, I am much more likely to have trouble with it because for me it only existed in that context, right? The context of a supermarket probably. So what I always make sure to do is when I'm using methods that I have mentioned previously, I always try to mix words from different units and different contexts like together, or I try to mix the words that I have learned in completely different points in time. I basically make like a vocabulary sandwich with different layers, if that makes sense. And this is very simple. You can put this into use in many ways. For example, you can write your diary in your target language trying to incorporate the new vocabulary that you want to learn. You can write paragraphs, short stories, or simply when you're making flashcard decks, just mix the words from different units. Don't make it like unit 1, unit 2, unit 3. As long as it's outside the group of the words from that same unit, it should work. So the last one, similar to many of my language learning habits, I was not aware that I was doing this, nor that there was actually a scientific reason behind this. But all my life, my favorite ways of learning new vocabulary has always been either listening to music or watching TV shows. And the type of TV shows that I have always preferred for learning languages were sitcoms, comedy. For such a long time, I actually didn't think much of it, but apparently the type of content you're consuming also plays a part in your emotional memory. If you're actually interested in the content that you're consuming and it makes you feel something, whether it would be happiness, sadness, fear, excitement, you're much more likely to remember that experience. And this is apparently because two different parts of your brain work together to strengthen the memory of emotionally significant events. Basically, if it makes you feel something, you're much more likely to remember it. And I think the shit ton of sitcoms that I've consumed throughout my life really helped me with this because I was just like laughing the whole time. I was happy. And on top of that, I was seeing all these new words used in context. Also, sitcoms are really great because the context like barely changes. It's always the same people, setting. So of course, it's many different reasons put together. But years later, now I know why they were more helpful to me than I had thought in the first place. The same goes for all those sad movies that I watched in English. I cried, but I learned. They made me feel something. Can't say the same thing for many of my exes. Anyways, the same with the songs. I already mentioned that they're helpful with spaced repetition, but on top of that, most of the time music is a great way to provoke emotion within us. Some of the greatest Spanish vocabulary has been put in this brain by the most gut-wrenching songs. So I'm basically telling you to take advantage of this by intentionally using like emotional experiences, content that would provoke emotion in you, in your target language. You can take advantage of your brain's natural tendency to remember emotionally charged experiences. And this will definitely enhance your ability to recall and use these words, vocabulary more efficiently later on. Also, it will make it more fun and you learn a lot. You cry, but you learn a lot. It's like dating. Anyways, this was my advice for learning new vocabulary. As a person who's been unconsciously learning vocabulary for such a long time, as always, any questions, leave down below. I try to get back to all the comments and I will see you soon. Good day.